international treaties regarding the international humanitarian law or international law or another treaties that governs the international or international humanitarian interventions, right? What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna give you a brief explanations about humanitarian intervention, what are the types of humanitarian interventions, and how to make arguments or case for and against humanitarian interventions. I will also explain to you several relevant cases regarding humanitarian intervention. So we could see the cases regarding humanitarian interventions. And lastly, I'm also going to talk about the impact or the aftermath of humanitarian interventions. What are the steps that needs to be taken by parties that are involved in humanitarian interventions after the humanitarian interventions occur, right? So in general, that's what we're gonna talk about tonight. And give you brief explanations about what is actually humanitarian interventions, what are the types, what are the examples of humanitarian interventions, who are the actors involved in humanitarian intervention. Then we're gonna see the impact and the steps that needs to be taken by the parties after they conduct the humanitarian intervention, right? So it is gonna be practical. I hope that it will be useful for you to in relations with making arguments in a, let's say, debate motions regarding humanitarian interventions. Later on, I will also give you reference on a very good debate, in my opinion, regarding humanitarian intervention in relation with humanitarian intervention, right? So let's start. Talking about humanitarian intervention, firstly, let's see interventions. If you Google it right now, you can Wikipedia, you can find it in the ICRC paper in the United Nations website about the definitions of humanitarian interventions. I'm going to give you three definitions that I think. Oh, wait a second. There is someone calling me. Wait. Okay, sorry. Let's continue. I think there are three definitions of humanitarian interventions that fits towards that will be relevant with our topics tonight. Firstly, humanitarian interventions is defined as coercive action taken by states involving the use of armed forces for the purpose of preventing or putting a halt of gross violations and massive violations of human rights or international the violations of international humanitarian law. If you see towards the first definition, there is an explicit coercive action taken by states. If we are talking about coercive actions, meaning that we are talking about active actions taken by states, right? Because if you would like to talk about a international relations theory about actions taken by states, then we will be talking about there is prevention measures, but there is also coercive measures taken by states. Talking about coercive measures, meaning that we are talking about repressive means used by states involving a armed forces or involving a military forces, right? So if we pay attention towards the first definitions, then there will be coercive actions taken by states. Secondly, there are also definitions saying that humanitarian intervention is actually intervention undertaken with or without military forces to alleviate mass human suffering within sovereign borders. The second definitions only limit the means of humanitarian intervention by putting by using armed forces or by using military forces. But the second definition say that intervention, these humanitarian interventions, could also undertaken without a armed forces or military forces. But thirdly, there are also far more broader definitions saying that humanitarian interventions is a means to prevent or stop a gross violation of human rights in a state where such state is either incapable or unwilling to protect its own people or is actively persecuting them. If we take a brief look towards those three definitions of humanitarian intervention, then we all can see that there is one same prerequisite that these three definitions give regarding humanitarian intervention. These three definitions clearly stated, explicitly stated, that humanitarian intervention can be undertaken if there is human rights violation, if there is a gross violation of right or a gross violations of international humanitarian law, or there is a conditions in which the government of a state are actively persecuting the people or the civilian of that states. So if you are let me continue, right? So if we see those three definitions, then there is a one same prerequisite saying that humanitarian intervention can be undertaken by a state if there is a massive violation of human rights or there is a gross violation of human rights happening in that state. That's first. But secondly, if we took a brief look towards these three definitions, then you will notice that if we are talking about humanitarian intervention, there will be at least two actors involved. At least two actors involved. Firstly, the actors of a states that conduct the intervention, and the other one is the states in which being intervened by that other state. Give an example of what happened in Afghanistan, right? There is say human rights violations conducted by Taliban in Afghanistan. So USA and other military forces coalitions are conducting military interventions to Afghanistan. So in the case of humanitarian intervention, there will be at least two actors. Firstly, the actors that are conducting the intervention, and secondly, the actors or the state that are being intervened by that other actors. So it always happens like that. There is a state that is being intervened by another state or by a military coalition. That is the case of every humanitarian intervention. There will be a state that is being intervened by another state or another military coalition. Now, moving on. Now, if we see the form of military intervention, that at least there are four basic types of humanitarian intervention. Firstly, there is a humanitarian intervention that would like to deliver emergency aid towards the civilian. This is the case of, let's see, people in places like Lebanon, in places like most notoriously Rohingya, for example. There are human rights violations happening in Rohingya, for example. Then international community is giving emergency aids, is giving their foods, giving their medicine towards people in Rohingya. Secondly, there are also humanitarian intervention, which means to protect those emergency aid operations. Because if you are giving or providing an emergency aid towards a state which is at conflict, then you will also need a military power to protect those emergency aids given by you, right? If, for example, Indonesia is currently giving, let's say there is a tsunami happening in Australia right now, then Indonesia would like to deliver emergency aids to Australia. What will happen is that Indonesia will also send their troops, send their military troops to protect those emergency aids that is currently being sent to Australia. Thirdly, there is a form of humanitarian intervention to save the victims of violence. If we could take a look at the previous slide, saying that sometimes in the case of military intervention, it is happening because there is a case of a state who is actively persecuting their civilians, right? So sometimes military interventions were taken to save the victims of the violence. If, for example, there are a conflict between, let's say there is a conflict currently between Indonesian military and people in Papua, and the civilians in Papua is becoming the victim of those military conflict, right? They are dying, their hospital is being burned, their churches is being burned, is being bombed. So there are types of humanitarian intervention to save the civilians, right? So these types of humanitarian interventions, they don't want to get involved in the conflict between Indonesian military and the organisasi Papua Merdeka, but they would like to save the civilians of Papua so they are not suffered anymore because of the conflict that is happening in Papua, for example. But thirdly, there are also types of humanitarian intervention with goal to defeat the perpetrators of that violence. Take an example of, let's say, Papua again, right? If there is a armed conflict happening between Indonesian governments and people in Papua, let's say that Indonesian government is becoming the perpetrators of armed conflict that is happening in Papua, and Australia would like to send their military troops to Papua to defeat Indonesia because they deemed Indonesia as the perpetrators of violence that is currently occurring in Papua. So if you could see that there is a big difference between the third types of humanitarian intervention and the fourth types of humanitarian intervention. The third types of humanitarian intervention, the main goal is to save the victims, is to save the civilians. Thus, the parties that is conducting the intervention, they don't want to get involved in that conflict. They don't want to get involved in the conflict between Indonesian military and Operasi Papua Merdeka, for example. But in the four types of humanitarian intervention, they would like to get involved in that conflict. Take an example of what happened in Iraq when USA come and they help to topple down the government of Iraq because they deemed that Iraq is at the time is giving a protections towards Osama bin Laden, for example, right? So you should see the differences between these types of military, of these humanitarian intervention. There are humanitarian interventions that only would like to deliver emergency aid, would like to deliver aid towards the civilians. By aids, we are talking about food, we are talking about medicine, for examples, but also there are types of interventions that would like to save the civilians, meaning that these types of intervention would like to take the civilians out of the conflict area, out of the area of conflict. Let's take an example of what happened in Afghanistan currently, right? There is a conflict between Taliban and people in Afghanistan, and recently there have been a humanitarian operations conducted by the government of USA to save as many as women and children as possible so that they could get out from Afghanistan. So they don't want to get involved in the conflict, in the armed conflict. But the last types of humanitarian intervention is the types of interventions in which the parties that conduct the interventions get involved in that armed conflict, get involved in the conflict between the civilians and the military, for example, or the military and the belligerent, for example, right? I think it is very clear. Now, moving on. After seeing the definitions of humanitarian intervention, after seeing the types of humanitarian intervention, after knowing the actors of humanitarian interventions, then we will be talking about a case to support and against humanitarian intervention. Firstly, if you are currently taking international relations, then you must be very familiar with this principle, responsibility to protect principle. I believe you currently have your phone. You can Google it right now. So you can read it briefly and you could know what is actually responsibility to protect. The first and let's say most common arguments used to justify humanitarian intervention is because there is responsibility to protect. So what is responsibility to protect? Simply, responsibility to protect is a responsibility to prevent civilians to become the victims of gross violation of human rights, like genocide, war crimes, or crimes against humanity, or aggression, for example. So responsibility to protect is simply a doctrine or a principle saying that every state has the responsibility to prevent any gross violation, genocide, to prevent crimes against humanity, or to prevent war crimes, or to prevent aggression, for example, including to stop it if it has been occurred. So responsibility to protect is a principle to give responsibility to every state to prevent and to stop gross violation of human rights. But the problem is that sometimes gross violation of human rights is not happening within the state jurisdiction, right? If, for example, Indonesia say that, oh, there is a gross violation of human rights that is currently happening in Vanuatu, for example, then based on responsibility to protect principle, Indonesia should conduct humanitarian intervention to stop the gross violation of human rights that is currently happening in Vanuatu. This is the principles used by countries like UK, US, and their allies to do interventions in countries like Africa, in countries like Afghanistan and Iraq, for example, because they deem that there is a massive violation of human rights currently happening in countries like Africa, currently happening in countries in South Asia, for example, so that based on these principles, they should conduct humanitarian intervention, right? So the most common ways to justify humanitarian interventions is to use responsibility to protect principle. There is a principle saying that every state should have responsibility to prevent or to stop violations of human rights from occurring, including if that violation of human rights is currently occurred outside of their state jurisdiction, right? Secondly, to help civilians. As I said before, okay, let me put like this before I moving too far, right? Humanitarian intervention sometimes occur in context in which there is an armed conflict happening in a country. For example, there is war between the government of Syria and the Free Syrian Army, for example. Or there is a armed conflict between Indonesian government and Operasi Papua Merdeka. Or there is an armed conflict between Afghanistan government and Taliban, for example. In those kinds of conflicts, right? In every kind of conflict, the most vulnerable actors must be the civilians. This is the very basic principles regarding armed conflict. So the most vulnerable actors in every armed conflict is the civilians. If there is an armed conflict occurring in Papua between Indonesian government and Operasi Papua Merdeka, then the vulnerable actors will be the civilians. The civilians will be more prone to become a victim of that armed conflict, right? Because they don't have any guns, for example, to protect themselves from the conflict that is currently occurring. Now, humanitarian intervention must be happening because there is, for example, armed conflict that happened in a country. Because there is, let's say, a gross or massive violation of human rights that is happening in a country. In every condition of armed conflict, in every conditions of gross violation of human rights, the victim will always be civilians. Thus, the second principle to conduct humanitarian intervention is to help the civilians. So we are not conducting humanitarian intervention to help the combatants, to help Indonesian government against OPM, for example. We are not doing humanitarian intervention to help Syrian government against Free Syrian Army, but we are doing humanitarian intervention to protect the people of Syria from becoming the victim of conflict between Syrian government and Free Syrian Army, right? So we are not doing humanitarian intervention to take a side in a conflict between Taliban and Afghanistani government, but we are conducting humanitarian intervention to protect the people of Afghanistan from becoming the victim of the armed conflict between Taliban and Afghanistan government. Fourth, the fourth most common justifications of humanitarian intervention is because the government of that state is unable or unwilling to protect their citizen. So imagine a context of armed conflict, konflik bersenjata, perang. Imagine a context of war or an armed conflict where the government or the military forces are currently busy in combating the, let's say, the separatist group, for example, is currently busy in combating the belligerent, for example, right? So the energy of the government sometimes drained because they have to deal with these separatists, they have to deal with these combatants, they have to deal with these belligerents, right? Then there will be no time for the government to help the civilian. Now, in those kinds of times, in those contexts, responsibility to protect plays a big role, because in here the humanitarian intervention the humanitarian intervention will function because the government is currently unable to deal with the problems of their civilians. Now imagine if you are currently in the middle of a conflict in Syria between Free Syrian Army and Syrian government, and you would like to, let's say, you are a woman and you would like to give birth to your baby, right? And obviously there is no hospital. The hospital has been bombed. The let's say the doctors have been killed by the Syrian government or by ISIS. So you have no one to help you. The government is currently unable to help you. Another civilians is currently facing same problem that you faced. Now, in this kind of context, humanitarian interventions is needed to stop the suffering of the civilians because the inability of the government from helping their civilians. So those are the justifications or the case of why humanitarian interventions should happen. But moving on, if we are talking about humanitarian intervention, sometimes there are arguments saying that actually humanitarian intervention is not fixing the problem, is not helping the civilian, Instead, humanitarian intervention will prolong the problem and make the civilians suffer more. Now we will turn to arguments of, let's say, against humanitarian intervention. There are at least 6 most common arguments of why humanitarian intervention should not be conducted at all. Firstly, this is the very classic arguments, saying that every state, every country has their own sovereignty, and this sovereignty should not and should never be bothered by another state. So based on this theory, they would like to say that if, for example, there is a conflict currently happening between Afghanistan's government and Taliban, and the problem should, then the problems should be solved by Afghanistan's government and Taliban. There should not be another state that should intervene with the problem between Afghanistan's government and the Taliban, for example. This is the most classic and most conservative arguments in against humanitarian interventions, by saying that every state has their own sovereignty, and because they have their own sovereignty, another state should not intervene with the problems that is occurring in a state. If, for example, take another example, there is a problem within between Indonesia's government and Organisasi Papua Merdeka, for example. Then another country like Vanuatu or Australia or New Zealand should not intervene towards that problem. They should leave Indonesian government and OPM to finish or to solve their own problems. There is simply the theory of state sovereignty, that every state should solve their own problem and another state should not intervene towards that problem. But second most common arguments against the humanitarian intervention is by saying that sometimes humanitarian intervention is just a method, it's just a means for other hidden political or economic means. Like, for example, when United States of America were conducting humanitarian interventions in Iraq, there are so many scholars saying that, oh, actually it is not because USA care about people in Iraq, it is because USA would like to, let's say, control the oil reserve in Iraq, control the oil reserve in Middle East, oil reserve, apa bahasa Indonesia, cadangan minyak di Timur Tengah. So there are scholars saying that this humanitarian intervention is only justification for other or bigger hidden or political means, menjadi jalan masuk dari suatu agenda politik atau ekonomi yang lebih besar kayak gitu. Nah, thirdly, there are also arguments saying that sometimes humanitarian interventions are only prolonging the suffering of the civilians. Why? Because as I said previously, sometimes humanitarian interventions are conducted by sending military troops, by sending armed forces towards another country, meaning that there will be more military troops, there will be more armed forces, there will be more wars happening in that country. Then it will prolong the suffering of the civilians, right? Fourthly, there is also argument saying that this is the environmentalist argument. It is not very common, but yeah, I think it is also interesting to be discussed. There are people saying that this humanitarian intervention, especially military intervention, will cause environmental problems, because in military intervention there will be bombings, there will be waging wars between both sides, and the victim will be environment. There is also possibility of horizontal conflict and rise of extremists. This is what happened in Afghanistan, because if we see the history of Afghanistan, right, there were times where Russia is in back in 1980s to 1990s, Afghanistan was a communist country. Afghanistan was a communist country. Then, you know, the Muslim group win over the communist group in Afghanistan. Then Soviet Union, Russia back then, the name was still Soviet Union. Soviet Union decided to conduct a military intervention towards Afghanistan, to Afghanistan. What happened is that because of that military intervention conducted by Soviet Union, those conservative Muslim in Afghanistan are, let's say, giving a quiet resistance towards these military interventions coming from Russia. At the end, they formed Taliban, and as we all know, currently Taliban become the most notorious extremist groups in South Asia, right? So sometimes the military intervention could cause even horizontal conflict between the society, between the people, and also, let's say, prolonging the possibility of the rise of extremism. Why it could happen? Because in case of humanitarian intervention, let's say United States of America are conducting humanitarian intervention to Afghanistan, then the people of Afghanistan will be divided into two factions, will be divided into two sides. The sides that supports USA and the sides that anti-USA. And sometimes these sides, right, these sides that support USA and sides that is anti-USA, sometimes they could even create conflict between them. That is what called horizontal conflict between the society, between the people. Sometimes there is a possibility of horizontal conflicts happening if we are forcing humanitarian, especially military interventions in a certain country. Yeah, I think the most notorious example of this is what happened in Afghanistan, right? Because the people of Afghanistan is currently divided into two factions: those who support Taliban and those who dislike Taliban. Now, moving on. Let's see example of humanitarian intervention, cases of humanitarian interventions that occurred at least this recent 40 to 50 years. Notorious example of humanitarian interventions that occurs in this 40 to 50 years. As you all know, there is a case of US humanitarian intervention in Iraq and Afghanistan. There is also the military coalition intervention that is happening in Libya in 2011. If you remember, at the time, they would like to topple down Muammar Gaddafi, the dictator of Libya, back in 2011. There is also military interventions in Syria that is still occurred until now, and also Indonesia's military intervention in East Timor, Timor Leste sekarang namanya, in East Timor back in 1975. I think I will not explain it case per case. You have your phone, you can Google it right now. You can skim read it. You can briefly read these cases, this example of military interventions as I speak. So these are the examples of military interventions that occur in several parts of the world. If you pay attention towards the, let's say, towards the trend of military intervention or humanitarian intervention, most of the humanitarian intervention happening either in Middle East or Africa. Jadi kebanyakan intervensi militer itu terjadi entah di Timur Tengah atau di Afrika. Sebentar, saya harus angkat telepon.
sorry. So most of the military interventions occurred in these last 40 to 50 years, from 1970s to 2020s, happens either in Southeast, in Middle East or Africa. It happens in Iraq, it happens in Libya, Libya is in Africa, it happens in Syria, Syria is in between Middle East and Africa. If you also see the trend or the patterns of military interventions, then you could see that the most common actors who conduct humanitarian intervention is either Soviet Union, currently Russia, or USA, United States of America, right? Obviously. So military intervention, humanitarian intervention, sometimes occurred in, less liberal democratic countries. Middle East, countries in Middle East is obviously not a liberal democratic countries. Countries in Africa back in 70s and 80s are socialist countries, socialist states. So if you see the patterns or the trends of humanitarian intervention or military interventions, they are occurring in Middle East or in Africa, and most of those countries who suffer, who experience humanitarian intervention are a non-liberal democratic country. So I think you could synthesize it by yourself. Why, for example, the parties that conduct humanitarian interventions is countries like USA or Soviet Union, and the countries that is being intervened is Middle East countries or African countries. Moving on. Now, let's take a case of military intervention has been conducted by those countries, by countries like USA and Soviet Union. They would like to topple down the dictator, for example. They would like to help the civilians. They would like to deliver their emergency aid. Then they have been defeating the perpetrators. They have been defeating the belligerents. So what to do after? What to do after that military intervention? Because military intervention is a process of when the military troops come to a country and they, either join the armed conflict or just to save the civilians or just to deliver the emergency aid. But the question is that after that long process, what to do? What should they do after that long time period? There are four most common ways taken by parties after military intervention has been taken. Firstly, they should bring the perpetrators to justice, meaning that to international criminal courts. They should bring those who in charge with that armed conflict to justice. They should be tried before the ICC. Secondly, UN peacekeeping operation will enter that country. So yeah, I believe you have your phone. You could Google it right now and click UN peacekeeping operations, and you could see where the UN peacekeeping operations is currently stationed, what is their duties, and what is their goal. Thirdly, they should restore democracy and make sure that reconciliation happening in that country. And lastly, there should be political and economic reform. In a debate context, these are the mechanisms that should be taken by the government of the House. For example, if you would like to support humanitarian intervention. So if you are arguing in a motion supporting humanitarian intervention, then you should say that after the humanitarian intervention finished, we will bring the perpetrators to justice. We will try them in the International Criminal Court. We will make sure that UN peacekeeping operation come into that country to stabilize the condition. We will restore democracy and reconciliation. And lastly, we will do political and economical reform, right? Especially the democracy, political, and economic reform should be conducted. Why? Because we are talking about a country who has been torn by an armed conflict. We are talking about a country who has been torn by a war. People are dying hospitals has been destroyed, schools have been bombed, churches and mosques have been burned. So yeah, obviously that country need economical reform, need economical and political restorations, right? So that are the steps need to be taken after military interventions conducted. Now, why do these steps important? Because I think we all have to understand that military intervention should not stop after the perpetrators being defeated. So military intervention should not stop right after we successfully send our military troops to a certain countries to topple down the dictators. But we also should make sure that these military interventions, that these humanitarian interventions succeed in changing the life of the citizens, in changing the life of the civilians. These military interventions succeed in reforming or restore the infrastructures and the economic conditions that are torn by war. We have to make sure that this military intervention or humanitarian intervention taken by the parties have successfully create a healthy and democratic political condition within that country, that we have reinstate democracy in that country. Because if not, then what are the difference between the previous condition? So I think if we are talking about humanitarian intervention, right, we should not only talk about the armed conflict. We should only talk about what to do within the process of the military intervention, but what to do after. What are the changes that this humanitarian intervention could give towards those civilians? Now, moving on, because previously I have mentioned ICC, International Criminal Court. I think I have the obligations to briefly explain to you what is actually International Criminal Court. So simply, International Criminal Court is obviously it is a international court who has the jurisdiction to try 4 types of crimes: genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and aggression. What is the relation between International Criminal Court and humanitarian intervention? Pay attention that after the humanitarian or military intervention has been conducted, meaning that the perpetrators have been defeated, the generals of the belligerent, the generals of the separatist group, for example, have been captured, right? The people have been free from the dictators. Let's say the dictators have been captured by the military troops that conduct the intervention. Then the next step to do is to try those perpetrators in a court so that they could be responsible for the crimes and atrocities that they has conducted. But the question is that if we are talking on a country like Syria, for example, in which the court in that country has been bombed by the terrorists, by the separatists, the judges has been killed, the prosecutor has been killed, or let's say the judges have been moved to another country because they afraid to live in that country, then there is no possible way for that country, for that nation to conduct a trial for those perpetrators, right, who has committed atrocities. That's why we have International Criminal Court. There is a court who has the jurisdiction to try those perpetrators if the national courts are unable or unwilling to do so. Because we are talking about countries torn by war. The courtroom maybe has been bombed or has been burned down to ashes by the separatists. So there are nothing left in that country. But on the other hand, we still have to make sure that those perpetrators, right, to be tried before the court so that they could be responsible for the crimes and atrocities that they have conducted. Then that's why we have the International Criminal Court. So after the humanitarian intervention finished, it should not stop there. It also should make sure that these perpetrators been tried in a international criminal court, for example, for the atrocities and crimes against humanities that they have conducted. Now, why this is important? Because sometimes if we talk about humanitarian intervention, then the most common or most popular scenario that people could think about is that, oh, there is a dictator in that country. What should military intervention do is to kill that dictators or to put an end to his life, right? But on the other hand, the moment you do so, meaning that you has become the dictators itself. You has become as bad as the dictators. That is why we should, make sure that these dictators, that these perpetrators, responsible for the crimes and atrocities that they have conducted. That is why we have mechanisms of international criminal courts, for example, that have the jurisdiction to do those mechanisms. Now, moving on. I think before ending my this session, I think after watching me talking for approximately 45 minutes, you could watch this video, the WUDC Open Grand Final Open 2011. The motions is this House would invade Zimbabwe. I think this is a very popular debate. Yeah, this is a very good debate if you would like to, look for arguments in supporting or against humanitarian intervention. So yeah, after this session, you could just open the YouTube, search for WDC Grand Final 2011 open categories. The motions is this House would invade Zimbabwe. Just watch it, and I believe the Prime Minister is Victor Finkel. He could give in 7 minutes. He will give you life-changing experience just by hearing his speech. So I think that's all. I think we should move on to the questions and answers sessions. To be honest, I have been very tired for talking about 45 minutes. So thank you, Dava. Saya kembalikan kepada Bapak moderator yang tampan, Dava.
Okay, thank you Kak Hans for the very insightful presentation. Jadi kita bakal buka Q&A selama 15 menit karena Kak Hans punya kegiatan jam 8 WITA. Ini ada pertanyaan dari pertama Afifah. Kak, kan pertanyaannya reads, kan we have the responsibility to protect, but then again kedaulatan negara itu sesuatu yang tidak bisa diintervensi. Jadi kalau begitu, bagaimana international law assess this? Karena at the end of the day, no matter how we have the responsibility to protect, we still cannot interfere state sovereignty. Itu dari Afifah. Dua, katanya juga Afifah tanya, mau memastikan Kak ini ICC memproses kasus si orangnya ya Kak, bukan negaranya yang dihakimi atau bagaimana? Mungkin kalian bisa clarify. Ketiga mungkin juga kayaknya ada pertanyaan pribadiku. Kan sekarang kayak banyak kasus di mana negara-negara nggak suka US invade in the name of democracy, karena ujung-ujungnya banyak punya trust issues ke US karena suka invade sembarangan atas nama demokrasi. Menurutnya menurut Kak Hans toh, kayak how do we find the deadline between kayak Western imposition sama humanitarian intervention yang betul-betul memang mau save orang yang lagi di harm in that particular country yang mau di-invade. Ya, itu Kak. Mungkin. Terima kasih.
Okay. I think I will answer the second question first regarding the ICC. So yes, ICC has the jurisdiction to. I think this will be a bit long. Yeah? Pay attention that ICC ICC is a criminal court. If you are if any of you in this Zoom meeting is currently in Faculty of Law or currently studying law, then you will know that criminal law
criminal law, hukum apa itu sebenarnya? Hukum pidana, criminal law only tried or only adjudicate individuals, right? So the questions is ICC only, tried the perpetrators or the countries? Then yeah, they make a trial, ya, membuat persidangan untuk tersangkanya, untuk terdakwanya, untuk individu. Karena prinsipnya gitu. Hukum pidana, ICC kan itu pengadilan pidana. Itu hanya mengadili individu, tidak mengadili negara. Yang kedua, crimes are committed by individuals, not by abstract entities. Crimes are committed by individuals, not by abstract entities. State, countries are abstract entities. So let's say there is a crimes against humanity. There is a genocide happening in Rwanda. The perpetrators of that genocide is not Rwanda as a state. The perpetrators of that genocide is the military troops of Rwanda. Okay? So crimes are committed by individuals, not by abstract entities. Not by state, but by people, by persons. Jadi kejahatan itu dilakukan sama orang, sama manusia gitu, bukan sama entitas abstrak. Negara itu entitas abstrak dia, gitu kan? Ada genosida terjadi misalnya, kayak gini lah. Ada kejahatan terhadap kemanusiaan terjadi, pembunuhan misalnya, pembunuhan misterius tahun 1982 di Indonesia. Yang lakukan itu anggota polisi, bukan negara gitu loh. Jadi yang diadili di ICC ya pelakunya ya orang, bukan negara, kayak gitu. Itu untuk pertanyaan yang kedua. Nah, pertanyaannya Dava dengan pertanyaan yang pertama tadi, menurutku gini. Ini kan debat yang selalu terjadi adalah responsibility to protect dibenturkan dengan kedaulatan negara, gitu kan? Ini pertanyaannya Dava sekarang. Ada Dava tuliskan di chat box. Ya itu betul. Kalau misalnya ada negara yang bukan anggotanya ICC, ya tetap bisa diadili, tapi itu harus through Dewan Keamanan, harus through Security Council-nya UN, Inggris, Amerika, Cina, Rusia, dan Prancis. But the problem is that US, Russia, and China is not the parties of ICC. So they have the power to determine whether a country should be tried before the ICC or not. But they are not the member of ICC. So yeah, fuck them. Now, moving on to Dava's questions and the first questions about the responsibility to protect and state sovereignty. State sovereignty and responsibility to protect, it is like two different sides that will never meet, that will never assimilate between one another. Because like responsibility to protect give you principle that you should prevent any human rights violation that is happening in another country, but the theory of state sovereignty say that, oh no, this is our sovereignty, you should not intervene to our sovereignty. Nah, the problem is sometimes people are thinking that sovereignty is ini harus pakai bahasa Indonesia nih biar jelas. Kadang-kadang ya orang pikir kedaulatan negara itu suatu konsep yang ada begitu saja, yang akuo, yang terberi. Jadi banyak orang yang dengan dasar atau alasan kedaulatan bilang bahwa itu tidak bisa dilakukan karena negara punya kedaulatan negara. Tapi yang penting ingat ini, kedaulatan negara itu tidak mutlak gitu. Ya, kedaulatan negara itu tidak mutlak. Kedaulatan negara pada dasarnya secara prinsipil itu cuma punya dua fungsi. Fungsi pertama, supaya negara dipandang sama di pergaulan internasional, jadi tidak ada negara yang lebih tinggi daripada yang lain. Tapi yang kedua, supaya negara itu gitu ya, bisa menyalurkan aspirasi dari rakyatnya tentu di tataran hubungan internasional. Nah, sekarang kalau negara itu bunuhin rakyatnya sendiri, kalau negara itu melakukan kejahatan terhadap kemanusiaan, kalau pemerintahnya melakukan genosida, gitu kan, berarti sudah tidak ada lagi legitimasi yang dimiliki sama negara itu. Kenapa? Karena kedaulatan, gitu ya, kedaulatan, sovereignty, itu legitimasinya ada dua. Satu legitimasinya ketika dia diakui sama negara lain, tapi yang kedua legitimasi ke dalam, ketika dia diakui sama rakyatnya. Nah, kalau ada konteks di mana terjadi genosida, ada konteks di mana terjadi kejahatan terhadap kemanusiaan, gitu kan? Berarti kan dia sudah kehilangan legitimasi dari rakyat. Sudah pasti rakyat yang jadi korban tuh nggak percaya sama negara. Ya kan? Mereka sudah pasti akan kehilangan trust-nya ke negara. Legitimasinya ke negara ini akan dipertanyakan gitu. Nah, dalam konteks itu kan, ketika si negara ini sudah kehilangan legitimasi dari rakyatnya sendiri, itu bisa jadi dasar buat negara lain untuk tidak akui lagi kedaulatan yang dia miliki, kedaulatan yang dia punya. Jadi teori politiknya kira-kira begitu. Nah, tapi itu jadi kalau kalau misalnya negara itu tidak punya pemerintah yang sah, tidak punya pemerintah yang berdaulat, kayak misalnya Somalia, dalam bertahun-tahun kan Somalia pemerintahnya berkelahi itu nggak jelas siapa pemerintahnya. Nah, dalam konteks itu kedaulatannya menjadi luntur, kayak gitu loh. Karena siapa yang mempertahankan kedaulatan? Ya government, ya pemerintah. Tapi kalau negaranya sendiri pemerintahnya itu kacau balau, ya terus siapa yang mempertahankan kedaulatannya gitu. Jadi itu kira-kira apa namanya sedikit teorinya antara responsibility to protect dengan sovereignty, bahwa sovereignty itu dia tidak ada begitu saja, dia tidak terberi, tapi dia diberikan legitimasi sama rakyatnya dari dalam dan dari luar sama negara lain, gitu kan. Dan yang ketiga dia di preserve, dia dijaga sama si pemerintah dalam konteks genosida, kejahatan kemanusiaan, ya pemerintahnya aja sendiri kacau balau, siapa yang mau pertahankan kedaulatan itu gitu. Masyarakat sendiri sudah kehilangan legitimasinya kepada pemerintah. Nah, itu yang pertama. Yang kedua, pertanyaan dari Dava, bagaimana respon ke kritik sama negara-negara kayak Amerika yang mau reinstate misalnya demokrasi dengan lakukan humanitarian intervention, sementara justru kadang-kadang mereka justru melanggar HAM sendiri, atau justru apa yang mereka lakukan itu mengganggu kedaulatannya negara lain. Nah, gini, saya kasih contoh dulu, misalnya di Myanmar. Di Myanmar sekarang junta militer kembali berkuasa. Pemerintahan yang terpilih secara demokratik itu dikudeta sama militer dan militer kembali berkuasa. Dalam konteks itu, kalau kita pakai teori atau prinsip responsibility to protect, harusnya negara-negara ASEAN atau koalisinya Myanmar harusnya turun kan untuk bantu Myanmar. Tapi pada kenyataannya tidak gitu loh. Mereka diam-diam aja, mereka biarkan Aung San Suu Kyi ditangkap dan junta militer berkuasa kembali misalnya. Nah, jadi kalau kayak pertanyaan Dava, di mana kita mau cari titik temunya antara apalagi namanya humanitarian intervention yang dilakukan demi memang benar-benar human rights dengan intervention yang mungkin hanya kepentingan politik dari negara yang melakukan intervensi gitu. Nah, kalau saya menurutku kita lihat siapa aktor yang melakukan intervensinya. Humanitarian intervention-nya ini dilakukan sama aktor siapa. Most likely, kalau aktornya negara lain, Rusia, Cina, Amerika, itu sudah pasti, jadi kita pakai teori ini, kita pakai teori realisme dalam hubungan internasional, gitu kan? Itu sudah pasti ada sesuatu, ada hidden political agenda yang mereka mau capai. Tapi kalau aktornya, itu misalnya organisasi kayak UN, atau ICRC, atau ya another organisasi kayak misalnya organisasi apa lagi yang sering ya, atau Salvation Army, most likely itu memang cost-nya itu humanitarian cost, humanitarian means, maksud kemanusiaan gitu. Jadi kalau saya cara paling gampang adalah lihat siapa aktor yang melakukan humanitarian intervention-nya. Kalau yang melakukan itu aktor negara, gitu kan, ya pakai pendekatan realis dalam ya teori-teori hubungan internasional, ya sudah pasti ada maksud tertentu yang mau dilakukan. Tapi kalau aktor yang melakukan biasanya organisasi internasional macam UN, ICRC, atau Salvation Army, most likely mereka ada humanitarian means-nya. Itu pertama. Yang kedua, lihat apa yang dilakukan di sana. Ketika sudah terjadi humanitarian intervention-nya, kalau kayak PBB kan mereka kirim peacekeeping operations. Tapi kalau kayak UN, mereka kirim tentara bersenjata lengkap dengan tank amfibi gitu kan, dengan rudal, pokoknya dengan senjata lengkap lah. Kalau perlu kapal induknya dikirim ke sana. Berarti kan mereka mau waging wars. Jadi kayak kita bisa lihat juga dari mekanisme yang mereka pakai, pendekatan yang dipakai dalam melakukan intervention itu. Yang ketiga, lihat negara mana yang mau diintervene, negara mana yang lagi punya problem. Negara kayak Myanmar misalnya, kenapa sekarang nggak ada yang tertarik untuk kembali reinstate Aung San Suu Kyi atau democratic leader? Karena negara itu tidak ada yang bisa dijual gitu loh. Beda dengan negara-negara di Afrika dan Timur Tengah yang punya banyak sumber daya alam. Yang kalau mereka turun intervensi, terus habis itu mereka reinstate demokrasi, pemerintah yang mereka pilih most likely akan jadikan negara yang melakukan intervensi sebagai mitra dagang. Misalnya, Amerika dulu intervensi banyak negara-negara di Afrika, gitu kan. Terus habis itu mereka naikkan jadi presiden di negara-negara mereka intervensi itu orang-orang yang sudah kuliah di Amerika, yang mereka sudah beasiswakan, yang pro dengan Amerika. Ujungnya kenapa? Karena ya akhirnya Amerika jadi mitra dagang dari negara-negara yang diintervene sama US. Nah, jadi mungkin kita bisa lihat juga karakteristik dari negaranya. Negara kayak Myanmar itu kan hampir tidak memiliki sumber daya alam sebanyak negara-negara di Middle East atau di African countries misalnya. Nah, jadi kayak itu bisa diperhatikan gitu. Cara untuk melihatnya itu tadi, siapa aktornya, bagaimana pendekatan yang mereka pakai, dan negara mana yang kira-kira sedang berkonflik sekarang, gitu kan? Kalau misalnya most likely Amerika datang ke Asia bagian selatan, ya itu kan sudah pasti ada means tertentu, gitu kan, yang mereka mau capai di sana, makanya mereka melakukan military intervention. Nah, tapi kalau kita mau tarik lebih jauh lagi, bisa juga lihat dari political ideology si pemimpin negara yang melakukan intervensi. Kayak Amerika sekarang negara yang kepala negaranya itu dari partai Demokrat. Partai Demokrat terkenal di Amerika sebagai negara yang selalu paksakan demokratisasi di negara-negara dunia ketiga, gitu kan? Tapi kalau misalnya yang jadi kepala negaranya partai konservatif atau partai Republik misalnya, most likely yang mereka lakukan adalah perang. Kenapa? Karena mereka partner dengan NRA. Karena mereka misalnya partner dengan banyak perusahaan pembuat senjata. Jadi bisa ditarik juga dengan lihat siapa misalnya political actors yang sedang berkuasa di negara itu. Nah, terakhir ini pertanyaan dari observer. Ya, observernya pintar sekali pertanyaannya itu ya. Sepertinya dia sedang kerja di di NGO yang berkaitan dengan pengungsi. Karena pertanyaannya berkaitan dengan pengungsi. If principally states should cater the victims of war or humanitarian intervention, does the act of state to cater refugee from another country is the act of humanitarian intervention? In example, Indonesian government currently facilitating NGO like IOM and UNHCR to catering refugee from Afghan and Rohingya. Menurutku bukan. Menurutku itu bukan types of humanitarian intervention. Ini types of humanitarian aid. Ini types of ini bukan humanitarian intervention ya. Ini hanya tipe kita sebagai negara ada problem di negara itu punya pengungsi, ya udahlah kita bantu aja. Itu bukan humanitarian intervention, itu hanya melakukan hal yang pantas dilakukan sebagai makhluk yang hidup dan berpikir gitu loh. This is the decent things to be done as a state, as a country. It is not a form of intervention because kalau kita lihat ke definition tadi, kalau kita bicara tentang humanitarian intervention, there should be an active act of that country towards another state. Jadi harus ada hal aktif yang dilakukan gitu. Harus ada tindakan aktif yang dia lakukan. Tapi kalau kayak nerima refugee, itu kan bukan tindakan aktif gitu. Kecuali misalnya Indonesia pergi ke Myanmar, terus habis itu sediakan kapal, terus habis itu tolong orang-orang Rohingya gitu kan diterbangkan pakai pesawat Garuda kembali ke Indonesia, pakai kapal Pelni misalnya, dijemput mereka terus diterbang ke dibawa ke pelabuhan Tanjung Priuk, ke pelabuhan Tanjung Perak, habis itu mereka itu aktif, itu tindakan aktif. There is a form of humanitarian intervention. Tapi kalau kita hanya mengcater, menerima atau kita berikan bantuan kepada NGO or lembaga yang membantu, that's not types of intervention menurutku. Gitu loh. Nah jadi I think kalau kita ini betul yang Dafa bilang. I think kalau kita bicara tentang aktif, ini bukan Dafa ya, active act itu ada usaha yang dikeluarkan, ada upaya yang dikeluarkan gitu. Ada resource, tenaga, dan sumber daya manusia yang dikirim ke sana untuk melakukan itu. Nah, misalnya kalau konteksnya refugee ya, kalau konteksnya pengungsi, negara kan cuma ada dua konteks, entah dia negara penerima atau dia negara transit. Entah dia menerima si pengungsinya atau dia jadi tempat pengungsi transit untuk pergi ke negara tujuan gitu. So I think it is more ke lebih tindakan yang pasif, lebih ke tindakan yang itu dia lakukan because it is their responsibility kayak gitu. Karena kalau kita bicara konteks humanitarian intervention itu tadi harus ada active act yang dilakukan, harus ada tindakan aktif yang dilakukan sama si negara itu. Contohnya kayak yang saya bilang tadi. Misalnya kita mau bikin humanitarian intervention untuk pengungsi Rohingya, ya kita kirim kapal Pelni 10 kapal ke sana, pesawat Garuda Boeing 777 5 pesawat, terus kita terbangkan mereka kembali ke Indonesia, kita bawa mereka ke pelabuhan Tanjung Perak, ke pelabuhan Tanjung Priuk misalnya kayak gitu-gitu. Oke, I think that's all. Dafa.